The thing that people with hair don't know about us bald dudes is if there are ever two of us alone in an elevator together, we like bend over and touch heads.
Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope your week has started off really well. Things have been pretty good here. Lots of writing. My boastful ambition of cranking away on my manuscript has been abated by the input of 45 plus pages of notes into the manuscript. I think I have one more day of inputs and I can start making the adequate changes. It's really interesting, this process that I go through when it comes to revision, taking these disparate notes or theme threads or character arcs, and I hunt through this, 150 plus thousand word document to find, oh, here's where this goes, here's where this goes. So then when I actually do the revision, these notes are just sitting right there in the location where they're supposed to go. So it's this interesting, it's like a road marker. You're driving along and the speed limit changes or the name of the town changes and I have to adjust. It's what works for now. Hopefully it works for good. I missed the Oscars, busy doing something else, but super excited to see some of the results and I get that same sort of excitement of, oh, I didn't see that movie. So I get to go watch something Oscar worthy. And I'm looking forward to catching a few of these movies. Today's guest is Van Jensen. It was an amazing talk and I'm super excited to share this with everyone. I love the talks where I kind of forget we're talking and I feel like I learn a lot in the process. His work is great. He's super articulate about what he does. And there's no doubt that he has a lot more to give to the industry. And not to mention he has a whole new industry coming forward with his first novel coming out this fall. I guess November, GODFALL, will be in stores. So I'm going to say you heard it here first, but that's so not true. But anyway, it was great talking with Van, and I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, try to keep texts turned off on my like iMessage turned off just because, I actually like when I'm writing, I turn Wi-Fi off completely.
So that's so brave and admirable. Right when the pandemic hit, I went over to our storage unit and I happened to have an armchair in there. So I would park my truck in front of the storage unit with the door open, sit there, and I would just write. And it was great because there's no Wi-Fi, no anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to, I built a shed in our backyard and I would write there and I had it wired for electricity, but not for Wi-Fi. No internet. And it was great. And then it just like Atlanta has started getting like insane amounts of rain. And so the back of our yard just turned into a swamp and it was like, I just couldn't keep it dry and like keep the mildew out of it. So I ended up moving to a new office. But yeah, when it's time to write, it's just like click Wi-Fi off. Let's go.
That's great. Yeah. It became a bit untenable with the, the summer heat was just so hot.
Yeah.
I'm like, let me just see if there's other options. And there's a writer's co-working space here in town. It's like this writing organization, but they have like this half of a house. And so what they do is they charge you $85 a month and you can schedule when you want to go there and write. And so I go there every morning from 9 to 1 and
wow,
and bang out the work.
That's amazing.
It's a great thing and a great deal. It's not too bad, not too shabby.
Yeah.
Best deal in town.
Yeah.
But That's cool. So how long have you been in Atlanta?
We moved here, let's see, fall of 2007.
Okay. All right.
So
Been
yeah, a
there for a
while
while
now.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird to think how long it's been.
Why Atlanta?
So my wife and I met, like we both just very randomly happened to get jobs at this newspaper in Little Rock, Arkansas. So she was an editor and I was a crime reporter. And it was, for both of us, it was like the job that we could get out of college.
Yeah.
And so met there, got married, and then it's like I knew even then like newspapers there's not much future here, and I really wanted to do like I was always into narrative nonfiction, um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of my drive. And she wanted to go to law school, and so we were like, you know what, we're not going to stay here. Let's just quit our jobs and move somewhere. And like literally just like overnight, we're like, we're done. We're moving somewhere. We don't entirely know where. Settled on Atlanta because it had a lot of good options for law schools. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just like packed up and went and
Wow.
figured it out.
Damn.
Obviously, pre having children.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, Atlanta is just has been exploding for 25 years now.
Yeah, and it kind of like I've had a lot of conversations with friends who've been here for a while, and we're all sort of like, is it time to move?
Right.
Because it's like every year we add another 100,000 people to the city proper, and it's not like there's not any infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
for
No.
for that many people. So
No.
and it's like every busy intersection they just plop more condos down on it,
Oh my
and
God. Yeah.
getting a little rough.
Yeah. I lived there in the late 90s, Dave Johnson, but it was real tough to handle the lack of infrastructure. That was like the number one issue.
Yeah, I mean cities that have a real like civic vision and
Mm-hmm.
build to grow. I mean they're great, and so much of it is like real public transport and
Yeah.
um, yeah, when you don't have it, and so much of our it's just this car based culture that we can't get rid of. Man, places just get
It's impossible. Well, it unless you live in Virginia Highlands,
yeah.
you're gonna have to walk. I mean, unless you live like downtown, it's just there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, and actually, Virginia Highlands is where my office is.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and
Whereabouts?
just off the Beltline.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
and then we live just like a couple miles away. So it's like we're close to everything, and our neighborhood is super walkable.
Mm-hmm.
I just like, I think back of like when we first moved here, and it was like, oh, like I'm gonna pop over to this whole other side of town. Like I'll drive surface streets, and it'll take 15 minutes. And now
Yeah,
I think about those areas, and it's like, oh, that'd be like an hour and a half,
it's
or an hour.
man. My wife is from Atlanta,
Okay,
but now her mother moved away, and her sister lives up in Marietta, which is way out of town. It's
yeah,
like an hour. So
yeah,
we're like, we never go in. We
yeah,
never go in.
yeah. Can't blame you.
Although I found out that Carl Story, the
Yeah,
amazing inker, lives in the same town that they do. So I got to track him down next time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are so many comic book people in Atlanta, and I never see them.
Right.
And
I
like,
was going to ask you.
yeah, like good friends of mine, like Rob Venditti. We wrote together for years, and but he's up in like kind of the next area north of Marietta,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a haul to get there. So like I think I've seen him like once in the past, like since COVID, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And this is one of my best friends in Atlanta. It's terrible. But yeah, I mean, all of the cool creative stuff that I've gotten to do in my career, like all of that has become, it's come from being in Atlanta. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, still have a lot of affinity for it. I mean, this is great. Like, I love conversations about, civic, civic infrastructure. And like, this is like, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, but, um, I feel like cities overall are just really bad at communal spaces and like communal
Oh yeah.
gathering. And I mean, that's probably more than anything a legacy of segregation. But yeah, it's just like cities don't know how to get people together.
No. And there's, it's a crazy thing is I think the lessons learned in Atlanta nationally have benefited other cities. So Nashville, maybe some Austin factor, definitely Houston, like these other southern cities have realized like, oh wait, we can't just throw 4 million people here and
Right.
expect it to work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And strangely, like Atlanta still hasn't learned. It's like, let's just turn like all civic
Yeah.
decision making over to developers and cross our fingers.
Right. I don't know if, I mean, the thing is, I think that genie went out of the bottle, for the Olympics.
Yeah.
Like they got all this money, they built MARTA to move the workers around, but not to move the people of the city around. And that just really kind of went from that point.
Yeah.
And we live in Asheville, so we're not too far away from you.
Yeah.
And it's exploding on a
Mm-hmm.
very small scale. It is exploding, and they have zero plan that we can see. It's just a matter of like, well, let's build more hotels. Let's, and those large apartment complexes are now appearing, in the periphery of
Yeah.
Asheville.
Yeah. We were just up there and I hadn't been for like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And I had that like, oh, Asheville's,
Mm-hmm.
it's doing that thing. Still,
Yeah.
I mean, a great city though.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a very cool spot to be, but you also go, having lived in Atlanta, you go, oh boy, this is this will be interesting.
Yeah, I know the end game here, and it's not great.
Yeah. Our mascot for our baseball team is called the Tourists. So that's the name of the team. So like,
That's
I
right.
don't think we don't have another plan, but like get the
Yeah,
tourists to come.
yeah. I had forgotten that, but yeah, we went to a Rome Braves versus Asheville Tourists game.
There you go. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's until any conversation about infrastructure, but
that's what the people tune in for. They're like, you get a little bit of comics, but mostly it's
it's civil discourse.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, but I think, this is the thing: is that this kind of stuff is the source of story. You look at these things and you go, oh, okay, because like we're talking about population increase, and we're talking about there are the sort of the second and third order effects of this, and you address that, or at least you address a solution to that in ARCA.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing that like, yes, this is, while this may seem completely random, it's not, because it affords you the opportunity of someone who may think of these things to go, well, what happens?
Yeah. I mean, I try to think of myself as someone who is very like intellectually engaged in the world around me, I guess. And people always, the two main questions I get is like, number one, how do you defeat writer's block? And that's a whole other thing, but I'm just like,
Okay.
like tough, just write, or just like admit that you're just not writing.
Yeah.
But
if you want to get into that part right now, I'm happy to, or if you want to wait till you finish your thought, and then we'll get back to it.
Yeah, let's circle back to that. But two is just, the like, where do you get your story ideas? And
Right. Yeah.
and I'm always like, story ideas that's the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
That's like story ideas. They're kind of I don't know, a dime a dozen. It's all like what you
Yeah.
do with the idea. But for me, in kind of, collecting information that then becomes a story, or that might become a story, I just try to consume a lot of information and and really be thinking about what's going on in the world, what's going on around me, like what are these interesting little bits. And I almost imagine them as like oddly shaped stones that are like, it's like every bit of information. It's like, okay, here's a new weird stone that I just like put into my brain. And so then I have like all these rumbling, like randomly shaped bits of stone. And then every once in a while, a couple of them like
Click. Yep.
And I say, oh, okay. Like that's sort of something that I want to explore. And then, once I have two that click, then I'm like, okay, let me look through all these other stones and like try to fit them. And so, yeah, like, you never really know, but where something's going to lead you. But I think a lot of like, civic and environmental angst and like existential worry, obviously went into ARCA, and that it's, a story about what happens after the end of the world. But then I'm from the plains, and I had read about in like Nebraska and Kansas. I think Kansas especially, there are these efforts, and this is happening all over the world, like New Zealand, of the ultra rich to like buy. It was like buying decommissioned nuclear missile silos,
right,
to be there. Like, we're going to create these like super ultra luxe underground utopias just for us.
Yep. Yeah.
And so, yeah, just that thought of like, what would of course the ultra rich would have a plan for when the world goes to hell. And I read this. I can't remember who it was who wrote it now, but I read this really fascinating opinion article by this guy who's like, he's a futurist. So he's he's like forecasting what's going to happen. And he does a lot of speaking events. And he wrote that someone contacted his speakers bureau and, was like, okay, like we would like to have him come and give a talk. And so they asked for information. It's like, okay, like what's the group, what's the audience, what's the general topic? And the person was being really like secretive about it. And they're like, well, what's his normal fee? And then they offered like 10 times that.
Oh my God. All right.
And so he's like, sure, like, like as long as my safety is okay, like I will go and do this. And so he goes, and instead of going to like a theater or, a college campus or whatever, he's just taken to like this really nice house. And they take him to a room inside the house, and it's like 5 chairs. So there's one chair for him, and then a chair for these 4 guys who show up, and they're all like billionaires,
right,
maybe trillionaires, like, these ultra billionaires, super rich guys. And he didn't say who they were. And they sit down, and they're just like, okay, what happens when society falls apart? And he starts to talk through like, well, it's like this could cause society to fall apart, or this could cause society. And they're like, no. Like, we don't care how it happens, but like once it happens, what happens? Because, it's like society crumbles, money doesn't exist.
Right.
So all that wealth that we have is worthless. So what do we do then? And that just struck me so deeply that it's, it's all about like, I've accumulated these riches, and they've afforded me the ability to buy literally whatever and whoever I want. And I need to maintain that. Like, it's like survival is not enough. It's like, I need to survive in style. And that was the thing where I was like, okay, there's something really rich here to explore.
Oh, for sure. There's this fantasy, we've see it playing out all over the place with people preparing for this, end of days kind of belief. And I'm not above it in the, the intellectual curiosity of it. Like, what would I do? I
Yeah.
love that. I love that sort of that example. I have this recurring dream, and I love my life and I love my wife, but I have this a recurring dream of just somebody showing up and saying, you got to get out of town.
Right.
And I'm like, oh yes, it's on, like, and
Yeah.
so, but like these people you're talking about, they're not me. They're not you. They're not fantasizing about, fashioning a spear and creating, a survival enclave. That they're not part of that world. They
Yeah.
have a very different, like, how can they create a structure where they don't have to, get a splinter, and risk some sort of infection? Like, how can they live, and how can they endure? Because somehow I think they also think that it'll all go away.
Yeah.
And once we get through it, we'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's wild to me. And just I kind of thought of it in terms of like, you look at sort of, the last time that income disparity was this high,
Mm.
and that ended with these rich families creating a ton of the infrastructure that is still with us, like public libraries, entire colleges,
National parks.
national parks, like huge projects that they were like, all right, like we have all this stuff, like let's use it to make the country better, to make the
Mm-hmm.
world better in some way. And not to say all of them did, like I am certain that most of them, you know,
We're looking at you, De Beers family. We're looking at you.
right. Um, but and you do see a few people here and there, but I think even like the stuff that we're seeing, it's more like, all right, I'm gonna create my own nonprofit that is gonna be this foundation that is more of like elevating my name.
Elevating your name, getting your name on an institution, doorway, and supporting whatever interest you have,
Yeah,
which is not the common good, it is the individual good.
yeah. I've got a friend that I write with, and his wife works in fundraising for a big international organization, and she talked about that. And Atlanta is huge for nonprofits. It's like our
Mm-hmm.
philanthropy is like our big business, really. And so we were asking her, like, how do you break down like the percentage wise, like people that are truly benevolent, people that are like 50-50, and people that are purely out for their own interest? And she was like, all right, like purely benevolent is 0%.
Right.
And then in the middle is like 20%, and then like 80% are just out for their own self-interest.
Well, there's a I don't know what it is, but there's a saying that no one will ever donate themselves into poverty. Like, you will not give
Yeah.
away money to make yourself poor. So that you will give what's comfortable,
Yeah.
not really what is uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I don't know. I certainly enjoy, you know, like I have a comfortable life. I enjoy the stuff that money brings, but I also, I just don't care enough about money to let that be the driving motivator for life choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It is. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think some of that is like, I grew up in Western Nebraska, and this is like one of the poorest counties in
Right.
America. And like, we knew kids that like wouldn't have running water, wouldn't have electricity. That wasn't, that wasn't like one family. It was several families
Yeah.
all around us. And so, yeah, like my definition of what is enough money, I think is just very, very different.
Yeah, it's just as long as it's not this overriding concern and worry, then that's okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know how big that sweet spot is, because there's a large gap of worrying about the money when you don't
Yeah.
have it, and then there's large swath of worrying about the money when you have a lot of it.
Yeah.
Or at least the ideal is to live in a space in life where you're not worrying about things. It's tough.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was just you?
In terms of like siblings,
Siblings? Yeah.
or was I raised by wild
By yourself?
animals?
Yes. Oh, now this is the story.
Yeah, somehow I turned up in a herd of cattle and made my way. Yeah, I grew up in a really interesting family and this is like super rural. My hometown, it's around 300 people.
Oh,
Um, and it might be less than that. It was around 300 when I was growing up. And then the whole county, it's like 1,000 square mile county that has 2,000 people in it. So, the big town, the county seat had like 700 people.
oh,
Yeah.
big.
Yeah. Not a street light in the whole, or like a stoplight in the whole county.
Huh.
But my family there, yeah, just very, very interesting, very different people for kind of what the area was. My dad's family ran the movie theater in the county, and going all the way back to my great grandparents and silent film.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that ran through the 70s. So it closed before I was born.
Okay.
But then my grandma on that side, she was an English teacher and a poet, and she she got one of those giant satellite dishes, like it like covers your whole yard, and she was always like on VHS taping the movies that had played at the theater. So she had this, just this enormous library of VHS tapes of
Wow.
all of the movies from like the 30s through, 70s. And so she would give us, like, we were always, going to grandma's library to borrow movies. So that was what I grew up on. Like I was born in 82, and I have like I've caught up on some of it, but I had no knowledge of 80s cinema.
Right.
It was just all like, yeah, just this classic stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then I would get like stories of like, because my dad and his brother, they were projectionists there, and actually like my uncles on my mom's side of the family, because my mom is from there too, like my uncles on that side of the family worked up there, so everyone knew the theater. And so they would tell me these stories about, this is the stuff that happened in the theater, or like what was going on in the town, or like my grandpa, who died when I was really young, when he was running the theater, he was always doing like these like pranks to, like, he would like show Creature from the Black Lagoon and then make a homemade creature costume and run shrieking down the aisle like during the showing and stuff like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, it was just such an education in storytelling, because I'm getting, I'm getting the film, but then I'm also getting the story around the film.
Right. Yeah.
And then on my mom's side, my grandma on that side, she was a poet also, and then the librarian in the town. So very, very literary minded. All of them, really pushing me to, and I was like writing and drawing comics from the time I was like 3 or 4.
Right.
So, but they were really, sharing great books, sharing great movies. And on my mom's side, she has several siblings, and all of them ended up, from small town Nebraska, went overseas out of high school or college. Like my mom graduated from the University of Nairobi in Kenya.
Okay.
And then, like went to study anthropology, and spent several years in Africa, and then came back.
Unbelievable. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and they're my mom and two of my uncles are artists, and now like have an art gallery in in my hometown where they display their paintings, and have a good bit of success with it.
Well, it's okay. So this is what's interesting. I mean, aside from the outlier principle of all this, in some
Yeah,
sense, and these two very distinct cataloging sides of your family,
yeah,
this sort of visual catalog and this literary catalog. It's a really interesting combination, which, you know, in this case, comic books do sit in the middle of that pretty well.
yeah,
It, but there's this other aspect where, thinking about ARCA and not giving anything away, what the gift that your mother received in this library, in literary background, is the sort of same thing your protagonist in ARCA has,
yeah,
that takes someone from their place where ostensibly you could just live your whole life there and that's it, and
yeah,
maybe go to Branson, Missouri for a holiday, and otherwise end up on the other side of the world doing completely different things, studying anthropology, which is like studying people
yeah,
and why they're people.
yeah.
and that's, I mean, that's a really fascinating sort of thing. And it's interesting how that you, by intention or just by osmosis, pluck that sort of out into your works.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely there. And for anyone tuning in who is not familiar with ARCA, so the kind of the big introductory plot of it is you've got this spaceship that's headed, towards the nearest habitable planet, and it's really owned and operated by the formerly the richest people, most powerful people on Earth, and they have serving them as these teenagers, and the teenagers and children, and they're you know effectively slaves, but with the promise that once they reach this new planet, they get to to be like the lords and rulers of this whole new domain, and they got the gift of survival where everyone else on Earth died, but they were like cherry picked for this grand
Mm-hmm.
existence. So that's kind of the background of it. And as I was thinking of it fairly early on, um, the thing that hit me was Plato's Parable of the Cave,
Okay.
which is, of course, the story and I think I remember right. It was like Plato's relaying the story, but it was he wrote the story, but it was someone else who originally crafted the story. But anyway, so it's you have a group of people who are chained inside a cave facing the back wall of the cave. That's all they see. They can't turn their
Mm-hmm.
heads. And so to them, all of reality is the shadows that they see projected on the cave wall in front of them and the sounds that they hear from farther up the cave. And where the parable goes is that if someone was released from those shackles and went out and saw what reality actually was, that they would be so terrified that they would want to go back to that
Mm-hmm.
reality that they knew. And it's that parable gets used a lot of different ways, but the intent of it was to describe the power of education.
Mm-hmm.
That that if you keep someone uneducated, that you can control them so easily because they don't have the critical thinking, they don't have the true knowledge of the full context of the world in order to you know to have agency
Right. Sure.
in their own
Yeah.
life.
They turn everything over to the people who are bringing them food, or you know handing them a latrine to whiz
Right.
in.
Right. And so, that then of course has been echoed in, Fahrenheit 451 and 1984. Like it's not,
It's a theme.
it's a theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of approach it a little bit differently because like you were saying, like, and I haven't talked specifically about this with my mom, but, I know for me growing up, super small town, there were not like I was the one kid that read comic books in
Okay.
in the whole town. Like I got made fun of for reading comic books because it's like a bunch of kids that work on farms and they're just
Sure. Right.
like what this is dumb. And I had to go to the grocery store and ask them like, can you order Batman and Spider-Man for me, please? Uh,
Right.
and but for me, as much as I loved that place, books were this incredible escape where like I mean I didn't get on an airplane until I was 18. So I like,
Okay.
extremely limited exposure to the world. A lot of my life spent staring at a cave, but books pulled me away from there. Like books took me
Mm-hmm.
all over the world. And so absolutely I was thinking about, if I was a nefarious billionaire, God help us all, uh, you know, wanting to control people, like, no, I wouldn't teach kids to read.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting concept to prosecute, throughout a work. That sounds to me that was your clear, like, idea, like this is the core theme that I want to sort of work through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that's really fascinating. This is going to sound a bit far afield, maybe, but one thing that's very fascinating to me in looking at when you have extreme right wing uh, governments and extreme left wing governments. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
extreme,
Yeah.
extreme, and you take like fascist Germany and Stalin's Russia. When you compare the like on the ground reality, they're shockingly similar.
So here's the thing. We so like there was this moment in my life where I was thinking about politics, and everything had to be this or that, this or
Mm-hmm.
that. And I kept going like it has to be chocolate or vanilla, that like these are our choices. And at one point I said, why does it have to be dessert? Why can't it be other things?
Right.
And in that context of where we have this left right thing, well, that left right automatically sets up a planar concept. This is a ray. This is a
Mm-hmm.
single line, two dimensions. We have a left and we have a right. But what we're noticing and what you're describing is a circle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you push it too much in one direction, you're going to be upset about this thing. So while we have, and I don't typically get very political, I'm not going to be political in this, but we have a point where people are trying to ban books.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of people angry about books getting banned, and rightfully so. But if you look at the other direction, they want to get rid of things that are printed as well.
It what I think it gets to is control.
Yes.
And it's a really hard thing to look at reality and look at the world around you and separate, like take yourself out of yourself and say, I know, and then this is me speaking for myself. I know the values that I have, the things that I think are important, the code of ethics that I have. And I also know that that is not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get, and it gets more extreme and more extreme. And it can absolutely go either way, that people are like, well, like this is my rigid definition of behavior that I want. And everything's got to be in there.
Yeah.
And I just think that universally, that's a really dangerous place to exist.
Yeah, and I think this is not a unique phenomena of now. I mean,
No.
I have my theory is if you travel back 700 years, 800 years, 1200 years, it doesn't matter, and you handed people mobile phones, with a working network, they would
Yeah.
behave exactly the same that we do because we're the same thing. We have not evolved
Right.
as a species any, from 2000 years ago. We really are the same. Maybe our appendixes are a bit smaller. But I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, it's just about that. And it's really, it's just painful that we have this very sort of narrowed view. And I think the feedback loop is what makes this become more and more narrow rather than expansive, which you think it would be expansive with the bulk of human knowledge available to us at, at our fingertips. We react the opposite direction because, going back to what you were saying about the shadows in the cave, what's out there is different, odd, strange, and I don't know if I know that. I don't think I want to trust it. I'm going to just kind of stay here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my general theory on the internet is that it is exceptional at giving a large number of people a very shallow amount of information. Like a very broad but extremely shallow bit of information. And it's actually like has a negative impact on deep information because we consume so much shallow information that you don't go deep on stuff anymore. You don't take the time to really dive into things. And I mean that's a whole other conversation. But I think like I just think with reading that so much of it is about consuming different things that are, from a wide variety of authors and sources that hit you in different ways so that you can, it's build critical thinking and really start to, but also like build narrative sense, like build empathy. I mean, just all of those skills that are so essential to personhood. And it's tricky because, like we were just on a road trip and we put on an audiobook of Where the Red Fern Grows.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had read as a kid and had seen the movie and remembered really liking it. It's like a kid in a very rural setting, like who just like wants to have hunting dogs and wants to go and kill raccoons with his hunting dogs. And so there, there's a certain like vibe to it in that sense where it's like, all right, like we're really getting in the granular of going and killing, raccoons that are not causing anyone any harm.
Yeah, they're not asking for it.
Right. And then it also like, there's a lot of like the kid keeps praying for different things. And, but then it's also, it's like, it's sexist. Like anytime, the kid's mom or his sisters, are brought into the story. It's like, but they didn't understand, women folk. And, and so, it's like you have these thoughts as you're reading these things or sharing them with your kids of like, okay, like I think that it was worth it to bring this in because there are these, these cool aspects of this, but also like it's messy. So we just have a conversation with them about like, here's the messy part of it. Like, I want you to understand that. And I just hope that people are, able to look at books as like, this isn't just like books aren't like a red pill that you just like, stuff in and then it like transforms you. Yeah, it's just part of a process of information accrual and growth and learning that hopefully goes on your entire life.
Well, that's you were saying all these different sources, and it is what it is it's like cooking. Like, hey, I'm going to make myself a wonderful Indian dish. Well, you have to have a bit of all these different things to put together to make the thing, palatable and exciting and flavorful. But if you just sat there with a bowl of turmeric and a spoon, you're not going to get the same sort of sense of like, that was wonderful.
Yeah. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of really opening yourself up to as many things. Like as possible. Like, hey, man, I was not maybe the most adventurous eater as a kid. But then at one point in my life, I realized, like, well, other people eat this stuff and they don't die from eating it. So the worst thing that can happen is I don't enjoy this particular meal.
Yeah.
But I get to have I get to have 3 more tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say it is very fascinating to be, and like terrifying to be coming out with a book about, using reading and the lack of reading as a system of control when
Mm-hmm.
that's
Sure.
that's going on in our country in a very big way. And I think the thing that some people get into, and I try to approach people with whom I maybe don't see eye to eye with some grace. And I think that there are people who are sort of like knee jerk reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there are also people who, especially everything with like there are conversations going around race and sexuality and gender that are like culturally new conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
We were not having these conversations, or at least not openly having these conversations, for a very long time. And so for some, I mean, for me, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. For some people, like, those are weird or new or scary conversations. Like, absolutely, there are big biases that come in with some people. And I think some of it is a fear of, well, like, I as a parent want to be able to kind of decide what exposure my kids have to
Mm-hmm.
different things. And like, as a parent, I relate to that. Like, there are books that I'm not, like, I don't want my kids to read yet. But then also, like,
Mm-hmm.
I was also very big on, like, I want them to be reading about sex education in a, like, palatable, child oriented means, like, as
Right.
early as possible to normalize things. And I want them understanding racism as early as possible. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's like we just, like, culturally are so bad at having big, tricky, complicated conversations. And it's so much easier to, on either side, get into this, like, yeah, like, we have to cut the head off of that thing.
I mean, listen, every conversation, as a writer, every conversation is an agenda based exchange. That's
Yeah.
what your characters are doing. One character wants one thing, another wants another thing. If they want the same thing, they're not having a conversation, they're planning. So
Yeah.
there's a difference, a different thing. And I think that we listen, change is scary for everybody. So
Mm-hmm.
we when these big subjects, which are very, potent, emotionally, the idea that I have to face things, I have to reckon with things. I don't want to do that. Let's not do that. And I'm not saying that's how everyone is, but that's just that sort of amygdala response to this kind of thing. Bringing this back to writing, it's having this wide group of influences, whether they're what you agree with or don't agree with, but there are these things out there. I mean, listen, history is filled with stuff you can't agree with, but
Yeah.
it's fact and history. So you have to look at it and you have to understand it. But these are the things that we use. These are the building blocks when you create things.
Yeah.
And the ability to tackle subjects that are controversial or fraught, you can do that through literature in to whatever extreme you want. You could do it. You could do it with a touch. You could do it with a sledgehammer. This is what we look for in art: is what is this saying? What is this trying to say? Not a question: do I agree with this? But
Yeah.
is this legible?
Yeah. I I had, I mean, I think this was kind of always my inclination, but I had this experience. I can't remember what year, but it was probably like one of the first times I went to San Diego Comic Con. So maybe like 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, like more than a decade ago now. And I was doing a signing, and I can't remember if it was with DC Comics or if maybe it was with Top Shelf, who at the time was publishing uh, Pinocchio Vampire Slayer. Um, but anyway, I'm doing a signing, and someone walks up, and like barely anyone knows who I am at that point, right? I mean, still, who knows who I am? But anyway, I'm not Neil Gaiman, right? And back then, I was especially not Neil Gaiman. So I was sitting there, someone walks up, and their eyes kind of light up, like, it's Van Jensen, and I was like, yeah, yes, that is who I am. And they're wearing a backpack, and they like, pull off their backpack. They're like, are you like, will you sign stuff? It's like, yep, that is specifically why I'm here. I am more than happy to. And they pull out a copy of whichever book, and they start saying like, I think they lived in like Arizona or something. And, it was like one or two states away. And they're like, I drove all the way here, and I brought like my backpack of books, and I looked in there, and there's like 5 books in there. Is all. And they're like, yeah, like this is what I brought, and I'm just here today, and I just really wanted to meet you and just a couple other people. And then they started talking about, and I wish I could remember the specifics, but they were talking about whatever it was that I had written, and some specific aspect of it where they were just like, when this happens, like that just like hit me so hard, and it really like connected with me. And for me, it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe anyone cares about anything that I do ever.
Sure.
But that this person drove hundreds of miles and spent a significant amount of money and time to come and see me, just to say like this meant so much to me. And it was like, oh my God, like I am writing this stuff that is going out into the world, and it's touching people.
Yeah.
And it's affecting people, and it's changing the way that they feel about maybe themselves or the world. And like, that's power. And maybe like I'm not Neil Gaiman. I don't have millions of readers at this point. I have thousands, or, I don't, maybe hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, certainly.
Cumulatively, you do.
Yeah. So, but like even like thousands of people caring about who you are and what you do is a wild, wild thing. Again, I'm from a town of 300 people. Like,
Right.
having 300 people care about me, like that's like a high watermark for me. So it just really made me dial in on the responsibility of putting fiction, putting stories out into the world. And the thing that I really hope to do is to always use that to try to make the world a better place. And I'm big on like, I don't think I have answers, but I think I can get people asking the right questions. And that's really what I want to focus my books on. But I would just hope that readers, and whether it's my readers or whether it's other readers, just really understand. And this is the thing that kind of keeps me up at night the most in all of these, the kind of culture war stuff that we're talking about, is you have to, as a writer, write characters that do not share your views and your values.
Sure.
I mean, it's just like if every character is just me, it's one, it's really boring, and two, there's no conflict.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of, bald dudes agreeing with each other. And
as a bald dude, I agree.
Yeah, right. The thing that people with hair don't know about us bald dudes is if there are ever 2 of us alone in an elevator together, we like bend over and touch heads. They, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that.
No, I'm going to edit this out. Don't
worry. Okay, good. Secret safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I that's the thing that I worry about, that I like, we'll put something like, like I did Two Dead, a book with Nate Powell, the artist who has done,
Mm-hmm.
the March books with John Lewis and tons of original graphic novels, and just a phenomenal artist. And it's a book about racism and policing. And like, I think that book comes across in a way that is very critical of police and is very critical of racism. But like, there are characters in that book that are hyper aggressive cops that just, want to hyper aggressively police Black people, especially. And they're out and out racists in that book. And, it's like, if you take one panel of that story out of context and like, look at what, this white guy
Sure.
put into a book. And that's not to say that you can't criticize me. Like, if I put something out that has, a broad racist message to it, or a broad biased message to it, absolutely, tear me apart. But it's just that nuance in reading that I hope that we don't lose.
Yeah. And I think, even characters that are of whatever sort of version of what you spoke of, they still have to be dimensional. Like, you can't, like, because if you just make them, if you make them the mohawk headed bad guys that are the street toughs that you see in all so many comic books, they have no meaning. They have nothing. All they are is just another punching bag. I think if you can give them some dimension, it grounds things, and it also makes the payoff for the protagonists to have more weight and significance.
Absolutely.
So we, when writing and creating things, you just can't look at something and say, well, that's the two-dimensional, analog. I'm just going to use that here and that'll suffice. It's not going to produce the result that you really hope for.
Well, and this is a big, like, my sort of big storytelling theory is that the thing that matters most is that the audience can emotionally connect with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And a little anecdote to illustrate that. So, and this is something, sometimes I teach writing or, do lectures, and this is a parable, if you will, that I pull out from time to time. But there was one year that I was at New York Comic Con, and I got invited to go to the Disney event where they're screening, like, chunks of their upcoming films and, talents there and whatever. And one of the things was Pixar was doing a presentation for Up. And so the co-directors came on, and they're talking about, and like, no one knew what Up was, no one knew anything about it. I think maybe there was like the image of like the house and the balloons in the sky, and like that was it. And so they come up and they talk about it a bit, and they don't say a whole lot. And they're like, all right, like, we have a lot of footage to show you, so we're gonna get right into it. And they showed almost the entire movie. And I mean, it was like 50 minutes or something. It was a very long thing.
Wow.
And it got done. And we looked at each other and we're like, that was awful. Like, not just bad, but like wretchedly awful. And like, there was just like this super over the top bad guy, and then like these talking dogs, and like dumb pratfalls, and this grumpy old man, and this annoying kid, and just like, Pixar made a like terrible movie, not just bad movie, terrible movie. And so we walk away from it, and I just forget about it. And then it's like 9 months or a year later or whatever, and Up comes out, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, have you seen Up? Like, oh my God, like, I cried. There's so all this stuff, and I'm just like, what? Like, what? No, like, that movie's bad, and just all the reviews are great, and it's all anyone can talk about. And so my wife and I, like, she really wanted to watch it. I was like, I can't sit through that again. And she kept like, I was like, okay, we'll watch Up. So we rented it, and this is back, when you get the disc from Netflix. And
your grandmother didn't give you a VHS?
Right. She had died by that point, I think. Otherwise, hey, nice, long, happy life.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we got the DVD and put it in, and this montage starts
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, this kid and this girl, this boy and this girl, and them starting to have this friendship and kind of rivalry and the relationship and building and all of this thing. And I was like, wait, what's this? This wasn't it. Like, this wasn't part of the movie. What I saw just started with like this kid knocking on this old man's door.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing keeps going, and it goes through their story and wanting to have a kid and not be able to have a kid, and then deciding to go on an adventure and then not being able to go on the adventure. And my wife and I are crying on the couch. And then watched the whole rest of the movie, and nothing else was changed about the
Wow.
movie other than that intro, and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like two different movies because I cared.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that happened, I was like, oh, like that's the magic. And then later, I was reading about, so, you know, the term suspension of disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of used commonly now that it's like when you as an audience member go and watch something or read something, like, you need to suspend your disbelief to enjoy a film about aliens or, you know, whatever. But the term was coined by, I believe it was Coleridge, and it was like this idea that at the time fiction was very real life, like super realistic. And when he wrote it, he said, as long as you craft real emotion, an audience will suspend their disbelief. So the onus was not on the audience; the onus is on the writer, and it's
The writer.
and
Wow.
it's all about realistic human emotion. And so, to get back to what you were saying about, you know, antagonists or villains, you have to apply the same thing, because if, you know, you can have a great protagonist, but if you don't care at all about the antagonist, and if there isn't any emotional push and pull there, it's not going to be compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, because purpose drives everybody, you know, hopefully, especially in literature, in works of art, purpose drives everybody, because without it, you're just, you know, a bystander.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets real boring real quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've read those comics.
I have started and not finished those comics and books.
Yeah. So curiosity, you're living in a small town. You had to ask the grocer to send to get comics. How did you engage with them? How did you find them first?
Just real lucky chance. I had a cousin who, like I said, my family was very international. His family, my aunt and uncle, moved to Seoul, South Korea, and they were in that expat community there that was off of the military base. And they had a comic shop next, or like as part of the military base, because a lot of soldiers and their kids would want to read comics. And so he had this incredible access. He was saying that they were like 10 cents a piece. And so he just had this massive comic book collection. And he's a bit older than I am. And so he came back to visit, and I was, I think, 3 at the time. And he had a backpack full of comic books. And so, you know, wow. And I like can still in my mind's eye just like see him like unzip and comics spill out onto the floor. And I think one of the first ones, because he was really big into Green Lantern Corps, and I think that certainly would have been one of the very first ones that I read. So it was pretty cool that the first, you know, superhero comic that I wrote was Green Lantern Corps.
That's really cool. Yeah, man, it's that first contact with these things that you love, whatever it is. Like, I mean, I have that vision of the comic book. I have that same vision with music. Like, I have all these memories of, like, I remember standing in line repeatedly to go see Star Wars, you know, in 1977. Like, these are important memories because you're engaging with something that is is changing you because
Yeah.
it opened up a portal in your mind and your heart, and it goes in. So you have background, obviously you were doing journalism, and you said that you really, really are into narrative nonfiction,
Yeah.
right? So what gives you the right to make comic books?
This
Kidding.
irrational sense
I'm
that
totally kidding.
no, I mean, I ask myself that question. Is like, just look in the mirror. Is like, why do I think that like the world needs this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
just like there. Um, yeah, very dumb thought. No, I immediately like was drawing my own comic books, and my
Mm-hmm.
mom, kept all of these old comics. I would also like. I was a weird kid. I was making political cartoons
Okay.
as like a 5-year old, and I think part of it was I like wanted to draw stuff that would engage my parents, and I knew that like
Okay.
they were really into the news and like all that stuff. So yeah, I was like caricaturing Reagan,
Mm-hmm. Right.
as 5-year olds do. Um, and yeah, and I kept drawing, and I actually almost went to school for art, but I never met anyone that made comics. Like this seemed like not a real thing, and I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea how to pursue it in any way. And then there was so much like I had a lot of shame around liking comic books because like I said, no one else read them. I mean, my dad and I, like, we have a great relationship, but he, it was like, when are you going to put the kids stuff away
Right.
and be a grown up? And my mom, really, really fostered my art because she's a painter. But yeah, so I put comic books away. Like I was really into basketball, really into journalism. And then I just happened to, I was working at the college newspaper in Nebraska, and I had these friends that they were reading comic books. And it was just like, wait, like,
No one's punching you?
yeah, I was like, isn't that lame? And they're like, no, it's not lame. Like, who told you comics are lame? And so they're like, you have to come to the comic shop with us. And so we would, John and Neil, and we would go to the comic shop together. And then we would, this is our like Wednesday tradition. We would go and
Mm-hmm.
buy comics, and then we would go to the Euro place downtown Lincoln, and we would eat a Euro and read our comics. And then we would trade comics.
Dude, oh man, I had the same thing in college. I think it was Saturday mornings. Um, we would leave the dorm and we would go to the Manhattan Mall
Yeah.
in Herald Square. And like on the fourth floor was Jim Hanley's comic shop.
Yeah.
And then we would go get our comics. Then we would go upstairs, get our food like at the Great Steak and Shake Company, and
Yeah.
sit down and eat the food and read comics with our 25-cent refills all afternoon.
Yeah.
It was the best.
It's the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Neil, it was, if anyone wants to look him up, Neil Obermeyer, who's an editorial cartoonist, he was always drawing and always making like short films and just, doing all this stuff. And I was just like, oh, like you can actually do it. Like this can be a thing that you do. And so, I mean, I was always pretty busy, but then I really started writing again on the side. And like I wrote a really terrible novel from the end of college into like my first year out of college. And then I wrote one comic script that wasn't anything that I could do anything with. And I was working at that newspaper, and there was this guy there, Dusty Higgins, who was the staff cartoonist. And we would, read comics and talk about comics. And just one day he did this sketch of like a bad Pinocchio who like lied and his nose shot through a cop.
Okay.
And I was like, oh yeah, like he lied. Yeah. And then he did another one where it was like, oh, but what if he lies and his nose shoots through a vampire? And I was like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a wooden stake. Like that's great. And then shortly after that, we moved to Atlanta. And that had been in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then Dusty called me and he was like, I think there's something here with this Pinocchio Vampire Slayer thing. And I was like, you know, in my head, I'm like, that's a dumb concept. like that's a like perfect 1 panel or 3 panel like gag cartoon concept. Right. I was like, I don't know. And then he was like, well, I like, have you read the original Pinocchio? And I was like, no, or at least not like since I was a kid, but let me go back to it. And so I picked up a cheap paperback of Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio. And man, it is so weird.
Yeah.
Just amazingly weird and like very complex in the message. It's like, it's very anti-child.
Like, yeah, well, it still is, even in the Disney version. You're kind of
yeah. I mean, it like Collodi hated children. Like he didn't have kids. He just like he thought that they were awful. And like the original ending of it was that just Pinocchio gets hanged and is dead. Like
yeah, and the crowd cheered.
Yeah, there were so many protests against him that he was like, fine, I'll give it a good ending. But at that point, I was like, okay, like I see, and it was the emotional connection. It's like, I see this character that like, you know, you take this really immature, totally unprepared to be responsible in any way kid who also has this cool power. And then all of a sudden, like, it's like Geppetto's dead and you put him into this position where it's like, he's the one thing protecting the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so you put all of the responsibility of the world on him when he wants no responsibility. And to me, I was just like, that's really cool. Like I can see where that can go. And so, yeah, we just, we got going on it and we did, like, I wrote it really fast. And then I didn't have an intro for it. And then all of a sudden I had this, it was like one night I was like, oh, like I see it, like this quick 10-page intro. I wrote that, Dusty drew it. And I basically knew no one in comic books at that point still. And I had a friend who knew I was into comics. He was into comics and he was like, I'm going to go to Heroes Con in Charlotte. Like, will you come with me? So I said, sure. And I had like 10 copies of this 10-page preview, took those with me. And I just like, I didn't have the guts to hand them to anyone. But then I went to this panel and there's this writer, Todd DeZago, and he was,
I know Todd.
Yeah. So he was talking about Stephen King's On Writing and
it's the best book on writing. Yeah.
And so I was like, oh yeah, like after the panel, I was like, hey, like, I'm sorry to introduce myself, but like, I just read it and this was why. And so we had this conversation about it. And he's like, who are you? And like, can we keep in touch? And I was like, so I don't have a card to give you, but I have this comic that has my email on it. So it's like, you can just like tear the cover off. And he's like, wait, you made a comic? Give it to me. And so I was like, okay. So then, you know, we go our separate ways. So then I didn't know that this was happening, but Todd, it was the year after Craig Russo had died. Right. And so they were doing a big signing with, you know, it was like Mark Waid and Tim Sale and Darwin Cook and like all these, you know, huge name people were all doing this signing together. And because Todd was a collaborator.
You mean Mike?
Mike. Yeah. Craig. Yeah.
Let's not kill Craig yet.
Oh my gosh.
He's a delightful individual.
Mike Wieringo, not Craig. Yes. Craig's the guy that, Craig and Todd collaborated afterwards. Ugh.
Yes. Very close friends.
Craig's very alive. Yes. Sorry, Craig. So they were doing this benefit, and Todd was sitting there and was like reading the comic and like laughing, and everyone's like, "What are you reading?" And so he's like, "You have to read this," and started passing it around to everyone. So then I was just walking along, minding my own business, and I hear someone yell, "Hey, Van!" And I turn, and it's like Todd, Mark Waid, and Darwin, and I think there was one other person that, gosh, I can't remember who it was. And Todd's like, "That's the Pinocchio guy." and they start yelling, and I was like, what is happening here? And so they pulled me over, and Mark like sat me down, and he's like, who are you? Tell me your whole story. And I like, I had just gotten accepted into an MFA program for novel writing, and I was like conflicted about it. He was like, don't do that. He's like, you can do this. He's like, I'm going to tell you, is like, here's who gets this published. This is what you do after it gets published. Like, this is how you get in the door at DC and Marvel. Like, this is the stair step. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's like, everyone comes with an idea, but you came with a comic, so I'm going to show you. So, like, go.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Damn. Todd's the best, and I'm not going to go on a big Todd side bender here, but Todd is the best.
Hugely underrated writer, and
hugely. He's
and just a great person.
If you're not familiar with Todd's work, hunt it down, find it. He's the best.
Yep.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. That's one of the great ones. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a lot of luck. Like I've had, I don't think you can have a career as a writer without a lot of bad luck, and like,
yeah.
Man, I've had some terrible luck on stuff. But it's like, without a huge amount of good luck, I wouldn't have had any of this. So,
but you did the thing. That's the other thing. It just, as Mark said, everyone comes with an idea, but all too often people just go, oh yeah, I deserve a seat at the table because I've got an idea. Yeah. And it can be a great idea. And I'm not knocking people who have got ideas, but you have to produce things in order to, so somebody else goes, okay, sit down.
Yeah.
And it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. And also, I mean, you were fortunate that you had a profession in writing.
Yeah.
So you did your reps, you had your chops in at least the act of putting your hands there and putting a story together.
Yeah.
So that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, one time I did like a back of envelope calculation, and I think it was like by the time I was 30, I had like somewhere around like 3 million words published.
Unbelievable.
Most of them not that good.
Sure. Well, isn't that still the case? I mean, the majority of what we write is not good. And I'm not saying that the work that you're producing isn't good, Van, but what I'm saying is that it takes however many drafts of bad writing to get to the thing. And so let's talk about bad writing and drafting, and let's talk about novel writing, because I'm reading your book, and unfortunately wasn't able to read it in 3 days. So I apologize.
It's understandable.
Yeah. I mean, ARCA did cut into my reading time. That took me a day and a half to get through. So it is going to that point of, we can circle back to the writer's block aspect in this one.
I think that fits really well.
I spend a predominant amount of time writing novel writing, or that's a dumb way of saying it. And I spend a lot of time with writers.
There, you revised it.
There you go. I'll edit that out too. But often there are people who come into the sphere, and the ubiquitous question is asked, well, how do you write a book? And my pain in the ass response is, well, you sit down in a chair in front of whatever device you use to write with, whether it's a pad of paper, a computer, or a typewriter, or a recorder, and you put your hands on the device and you start pushing buttons.
Yeah.
And what I feel, having done the process and seen people go through the process, is that the fear of what we see on shelves, on our shelves, and on our television screens in the movie theaters is a finished product. And it's as good as it can be at that time. And it can be great. But that's a daunting task when you sit down and you put something down and it's not that. And the response, I think the natural response is, well, I guess I'm not good at this. But the act of writing isn't putting something down and it being perfect. The act of writing is fixing the idea and making it work.
Yeah. So there's one piece of advice that I try to give people, because I think that there's one thing that people do get stuck on, and it is a frustration point for people. And so very generally, like my big philosophy on writing is that you actually need to be a master of two disciplines. You need to be a master of writing, and you need to be a master of storytelling. And these are different disciplines. And people don't think of it that way. They just think of, I need to go write a book. And they don't think of, I need to tell a story and write it well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit of a kind of like production chain to it when you start to think of storytelling and writing in different ways. But I think what often happens to people is they get like, neck deep in the writing, and they're hitting on these really big story problems, and they don't realize that they don't have that understanding of like, oh, I can pull back and really analyze the story separately.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, it can kind of feel like it's like you have a table of sand in front of you and you're trying to build shapes in it, and then you're like, trying to make the whole thing beautiful, but then you do that thing and you drag your elbow through this thing and then you ruin that.
Sure.
Just this giant mess. And that is super frustrating. So some of it is, I think, just really, really focusing on story and building up kind of that plan of the story, even if it's just some basic mile markers, and just knowing the story that you're telling before you get deep and you're like, oh crap, I don't.
Where am I?
Where am I? So there's that aspect, but then absolutely, the thing that I always tell people is my training was I was a newspaper reporter, and there was a period where I was on the crime beat and I was doing what we called night cops. Night cops is you start your day around like noon and you go until like 10 p.m. And you come in, you get the police scanner. That's the radio where the cops and dispatchers are talking to each other. And so you're listening in on all the stuff they're talking about. And then you're like going to the police stations and getting, crime reports on like this happened, following up on, whatever needs to be followed up on. But the whole time you're listening to that scanner. And so sometimes it would happen where it's like 9 at night, 8:30 at night, all of a sudden it's like shots fired, whatever. And, there was one night where it's really creeping up on deadline. And I get this call of this like, naked man running around the street with a knife and a dead body with multiple stab wounds. And right. It's at this apartment complex. So I'm like, all right, like run, I tell the copy desk, like, hold on, like run to my car, haul across the city, like go talk to neighbors, talk to cops, like look at what's happening, like watch the police tackle this naked guy that got into a knife fight. Talk to the cops, like get everything I can, like get back in my car, and I'm like on the phone, like dictating stuff to the copy desk as I'm driving, rush upstairs, and I've got to file this story. And it's not like, well, I have writer's block. Like I can't quite figure out what to do here. Like if I don't do this, I don't have a job in the morning. So I just do it. And it's like, it is as good as it can be in that amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the thing about creativity, it's a muscle. The more you exercise it, the better shape that it is, and it will be there for you when you need it. And where I know that I do fall short on is the craft aspect. Like I don't have the ability to fall back on craft as a writer to grind my way through it. But I have, 3 decades of.
How old are you?
I'm 720 years old. So,
you look great.
Hey man, it's great.
Can I just say?
Yeah, well, the blood of babies is really it's an amazing elixir. But the storytelling, there's my craft I can fall back on.
Yeah.
I have 3 decades of storytelling in my back pocket that I'm always able to at least whip up, and gin up, the character, the setting, the whatever the thing is, to make it a thing. And then I know, what, when I go back through it, I'll be able to fix those things that I know that I need to work on that I just don't have as far as craft goes.
Yeah. No, I'm very similar. I mean, I'm never going to be the sharpest writer in the room. I'm never going to be that, person that just crafts these hyper beautiful languages or, sentences
Mm-hmm.
that everyone is oohing and eyeing over. And I don't get into really weird stylization stuff. I mean, I like some formal experimentation, but my kind of approach to writing is to think of it as like sculpting out of stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, and I rewrite a lot as I go. And so I just am going back to it, and I'll read stuff out loud. And at the very least, I'm reading it in my head. And it's just that, like, looking for rough edges. And so I'm just turning a sentence again and again. And if there's some little thing that I'm just scratching, I'm like, all right, what can I do to just cut, slice that little bit off and refine it.
It's not always it's not always in that sentence. That's the weird thing. Sometimes you're finding that rough thing, but then you have to kind of like go back, read what you're, and like, oh, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the wrong POV. Like, the wrong character is
Oh yeah.
talking in this one, or hey, I need to be paying more attention to what these characters are trying to achieve, because you can get hung up on the sentence saying, oh man, it's just not the sentence isn't
Yeah.
working. Well, it's just context.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the balance of looking at both of those things. I mean, and that's where having good readers really, really helps.
Yeah.
And like the novel, I mean, I had written 2 bad novels, and I had never really had readers on them. And so this novel, I had good readers on, and, the help of my agent and help of an editor. And I mean, I rewrote it like 3 times. And even
Okay.
the final time that I wrote it, they weren't huge notes, but I actually wrote it fresh from scratch.
Okay. So that's interesting.
Cause I had the printout of it
Yeah.
next to me. But and part of it was I had the very first draft had been like 4 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, I want it to feel like a book that I would write now, not the book I wrote 4 years ago. But I mean, I was just terrified, and like I had no thought of like, oh, I know how to write. I write comics, and like I've written nonfiction. I was like, I hope this doesn't suck. And
Yeah.
I just had to go through the exercise, which like I didn't think about, is like, you have a book coming out, you have to get blurbs for it. So you have to go to established authors and be like, hey, will you read this? And like,
Mm-hmm.
if you like it, will you write something? And I was just like, oh, I'm gonna get exposed. these, these people are gonna hate this book. And I mean, maybe the happiest that I've ever felt as a writer is getting those responses back where people are like, this is good. Like, you can
Yeah.
write, like, get over yourself. Like, you can
Right.
do it.
Yeah. I have a terrible habit of, downplaying everything I do, even before people get their hands on whatever the thing is. And my angel of a godmother wrote an email to me saying, you need to stop doing that. Just
Yeah.
straight up stop doing that, because what you do is worth people paying attention to, and just leave it there. Don't.
Yeah. It's a very Midwestern ethos. So I'm surprised, to hear it from a
Some
New
fancy New
Yorker.
Yorker like me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, when you see me walking around in my solid gold suit, you'll know I've changed my attitude completely.
Just solid gold suit, sucking on baby puree.
I know. It's like, hey, what you drinking there? None of your business. It's just called life. It's called life. I love that idea. I'm terrified of that idea also, of the just writing it fresh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. This is the other thing: is books are tricky because like everyone you have to approach as a unique thing, and the process changes
Mm-hmm.
book to book.
Yeah.
Because I had one. So actually the very first comic script I wrote was this story, which it's based on a true bit of history, which is that so Santa Anna, the Mexican general and president, like he was in and out of power like 7 times. And during the pastry war with France, he got his leg knocked off by a cannonball at the knee. And so his false leg was very famous, and it like showed up like there I think there are like 3 different museums that claim to have his artificial leg.
Okay.
And it was like after his army was captured in Texas after the Alamo, like that was how they identified him. It was like he tried to dress himself up as like a run of the mill soldier, but he had a limp, so they knew. But anyway, he his like the actual leg that got knocked off, he gave it a full military funeral, and then one of the times he fell out of power, people dug up his leg and dragged it through the street.
Oh my God.
And that's like, I heard that. I had a Mexican history class in college, and that just always really stuck with me of just like how insane that was. And so I wrote this graphic novel called The Leg that is about Santa Anna's disembodied leg that's like in a boot adventuring across Mexico in the 1930s, and is super weird.
I love it.
And so I was never going to do anything with it. I was just like, this is really weird. It like, I taught myself how to write and format comics with them, but like, that's it. And it sat. And then I got introduced to this artist, Joe Pimienta, who we met at Comic-Con one year. And he was like, oh, I'd love to work together. And I was like, I don't really have anything at the moment. Like the only script I have is this like book about Santa Anna's leg. And he was like, wait, tell me a little bit. And so I told him, he was like, I grew up in Mexico. Like, please let me read this script. And I was just like, oh,
Like the record scratch.
Yeah. I was like, okay, but like, you're going to hate it. And he read it, and I had, gone home by that point, and he emailed me. He was like, I had to wait until I stopped crying to email you, but please let me draw this book.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, yes, like let me pay you to draw the book. So he, he was ready to jump into it. And I looked back at that script, and I'm like, and I had, at that point I was drawing or writing for DC Comics, which is this very hyper structured, like, like clean story focused thing. And so I had really gotten into this mode of like super structured storytelling. And I looked back at that script and I was just like, oh, this is such a mess. Like, I really need to go and completely rewrite it. And I stopped myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this one is super imperfect and messy, but like, I think that if I like go in and hyper structure it, it's going to lose that magic.
It's like that what do they call quantizing music that they do now, where everything is in the exact beat and everything is at the right frequency.
Yeah.
And it may sound, and I'm using air quotes, perfect, but it really isn't, because it's the imperfections that we hear in music and in human performance that we go, oh, that's what I like.
Well, this is not, this is a perspective I'm going to share that no one else in the world agrees with. So huge grain of salt.
Oh, good.
I hate CG animation.
Okay.
Like there's almost none of it that resonates with me at all. Like, it just feels so stiff. And I realized that I was like I can't connect with this aesthetic, and like, why, but like, I love animation.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what is that? I was like, I think that part of it is that like my brain can actually connect to animation because it's like I understand how it was made. Like I get
Mm-hmm.
the hand drawing and putting it together and yeah, it's like it has these imperfections in it
Yep.
where this other thing is so clean and so clear and so crisp and is all like algorithmed
Mm-hmm.
so expertly that it's just inert to me.
I'll give you a real world non-comic example of this. For bread and butter, I do a lot of art direction and design for large companies who want to do special events.
Yeah.
So like last fall I did a pop-up store in the Diamond District in New York City in Manhattan for eBay. So we completely rebuilt this interior for 3 days. Like it was just up for 3 days, and one of those days was only for private people, but 2 days for the public. And with many of these jobs, you walk into the meeting, and what they immediately want to see from you is a computer rendering of what the idea is going to be. I have disabused the client who hires me to do these jobs to deliver these computer renderings, because what happens is the people who are looking at these things that are well constructed see these as real, and because the concept hasn't been completely fleshed out, this is the rough draft, but we're
Mm-hmm.
showing you final looking artwork for a rough draft. It's full of mistakes, and the non-creator can't look at something with mistakes and see it as a work in progress to evolve toward. They look at it as raw.
Yeah.
I will only start things off with hand drawings because I can't afford to waste my time in the other aspect. So I know that when a human looks at something another human creates with their hands, they can fill the gaps in.
Yeah.
They go, well, that doesn't look exactly like the chair we have envisioned, but we know it's a chair, and that's okay because we have an idea of what we want the chair to look like. And then it's not an X, it's not a red X. It's
Yeah.
an okay. We
Yeah.
can move forward. And I get that when it comes to the animation. I don't hold your Lonely Man Hill stance towards, CG, because I love me some Pixar movies. But for the most part, I do understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I guess a better way of putting it is I look at every Pixar movie as I think it would be better if it was traditionally animated.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But again, it's lonely on this hill.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, listen, this is what happens, as we all age into becoming cavemen.
Grumpy 700-year-olds.
Yes, our belief systems are far out of date. Did you read Creativity Incorporated?
No.
Okay, I'll send you the information.
Okay.
Yeah, you like it.
Yeah, I have not heard of that, but based on title alone,
Yep.
I think I'm in.
It seems like we could kind of do this for a long time, so I'm gonna let you.
Yeah, this is one of those conversations where God only knows where it would end up and what we would be talking about. But
Yeah, yeah, I mean that this is the problem with writers. We can get into it, and so I appreciate that in so many ways. Why don't you let anybody listening know what they can look forward to, and or what they can go find of yours that you really want them to read?
yeah, well, welcome people to check out vanjensen.com. That's got a page that's got all of my comics works on it. So I'm always happy if anyone wants to check out anything that I've written. The book Two Dead with Nate Powell, that's a really special one that it came out right before the pandemic, so we didn't get as many eyes on it as I was hoping. So I just, everyone who reads it really seems to take to it. So I hope that more people will check that out. And then I've got ARCA coming out in July. I'm going to be doing a comic book anthology that will be launching on the Zoop platform in
Oh,
May.
cool.
That's going to be around the works of Fletcher Hanks, who is a super weirdo Golden Age creator. And then let's see, my novel Godfall is out in October or November, I believe. I have a Dark Horse series called Tear Us Apart with Alessandro Micheli on art. He's this fabulous Italian artist. And that one is co-written by Jay Baruchel, who is the actor, director, writer, famous Canadian. And let's see. Oh, and then I have an ongoing series coming from IDW later this year or early next year that I can't share the title yet, but I think is the best thing that I've ever written.
Well, I can highly recommend ARCA. It was incredibly hard to put down. Jesse, of course, is Jesse Lonergan. It is amazing.
Phenomenal.
I mean, yeah, his work is just always compelling and so thoughtful.
Yeah, he I can't say enough about him. I mean, he brought so much to the story of the book. He it's like early on he sends me this page and it's like here, this is the grid that I'm planning on, and it's this super intricate grid. Here's the grid that I'm planning on using for this book. It's like, yeah, man. Like that's amazing that like I don't know that I've ever had any artist, think about the grid of structure. And I mean, I can't count how many times I wrote like a 5-panel page and he turned it into a 17-panel page.
Dude, I would sit there and count panels on those pages. I'm like, 23 panels. All right, man. You on with your bad stuff.
Well, and there's this thing that you do in writing comic books where it's like once the art is finished, then you go and write a lettering draft of the script that you take the actual art and give the letterer this, like, because the artist absolutely should change the structure of the script to maximize the storytelling, and so that there are always going to be those changes. And with this one, I was just like, yeah, like, can they just look at Jesse's roughs with like balloon placements, and then I'll like rework dialogue as needed. But like
what are you going to do?
It would take me like 2 months to write all. Yeah. Panel 21, panel 22, panel 23.
Yeah. Well, because like we typically view like the artist as the actor in so many ways when it comes to what's going on the page. But I also feel that lettering pass, that's the chance for the writer to be a bit of an actor too, because you really can push and pull things in and really gin up the drama or play things down.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of quality to that metaphor, but then there are some places where it falls a little bit short, I guess. And one of the I guess kind of generally, like, the way that I look at it is when I write a comic book script, it is one letter in an ongoing back and forth communication. Like that, like a comic book script is a letter to the artist.
Yeah.
And
it's cool.
And so, people ask me like, how do you write the script? Like, what's the voice of it? And the formatting mostly stays the same, but like the tone of each of my scripts is different because my collaborators are different. Like, I wouldn't write the same letter to different people. Like I am communicating with that very specific person. And And then the great thing is like when you have a good rapport, like that dialogue, it goes back and forth. And so yeah, like you said, the lettering, adjusting it at the last stage, that is a response to the art, which is a response to my script. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the return letter back. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that. I really like that. Um, Van, this was great. I really enjoyed talking with you. And
Same.
super excited. I'm super excited to finish the book. So it's a great premise. I'm not going to give anything away because it's really, really interesting. I'm excited to see where it goes. And talking with you really ties so much together. I love that.
There's definitely, yeah, there's a lot of art conversation that's present in the novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's quite fantastic, and I can't wait to get through it. And that's in a positive way, not get through it like it sucks.
Well, this has been just a huge pleasure. We will have to do it again, if only so that I can get that recipe for baby puree.
It'll be in the email. Don't.
Perfect.
See you, man.
All right. See ya.